Dean Croke for Data Day Wednesday. I love Data Day Wednesday. I wish there was a day of the week that began with D. We can call it Triple D, the Triple D Day. Dean Data Day, the Triple D Day. And welcome everybody. I know that was a lot of days in one sentence, wasn't it? Welcome everybody. Today is probably one of my favorite days of the week because we get to talk to my main man, Dean Croke, to talk about all things data. And I know it's going to be a big conversation today because there's been actually like a lot of things in the last week transpire in our industry. And we'll bring everybody up to date right after this. To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. So, Dean, I know there's been a lot of turmoil in our industry in the last week. Let's dive right in. What do you see happening?
Where do we start?
This is a wild January. You know, normally spot rates sort of dive down in January. The market cools off, demand settles. Chinese New Year happens. You know, the shipping industry quietens down between now and March. It's like the exact opposite, and anything you could imagine going wrong is going wrong in the freight market. And wrong is sort of a relative term, right? Because for shippers, it's not good because high rates are, hurting them. For truckers, it's great. So it depends on what side of the ledger you're on, and brokers are kind of navigating that margin, compression or expansion gap in the center. But this is a wild time. We had spot rates go up the week before. They came back down this week. A little bit of seasonality came back into the market, which is not unusual. But I think what's happening, we've had 3 weeks of really bad weather that's impacted markets regionally. We've got another big, I think they call it a bombogenesis storm coming into New England this weekend. So about a foot of rain and a foot of snow and a blizzard is what's predicted. So again, that's going to really disrupt the Northeast and push up spot rates. So capacity is already tight in markets like Philadelphia. A lot of our winter produce comes in there. So regionally, there's lots of activity in the market. But spot rates, just for context, it's an interesting data point. Spot rates are 70 cents a mile higher than the same week last year.
Wow. Did you say 70?
70, right?
70.
Now, but get this, it's 81 cents a mile higher than week 3 in 2018. Now,
okay, that is a serious piece of data.
That was huge right there.
What was happening then, right? It was the rate rally was just getting going.
Yes.
And we're already 80 cents a mile higher, and that's just dry van. I think it's even higher. Let me just check the data here. In reefer, we're 85 cents a mile higher than week 3 in 18, 90 cents a mile higher year over year. Flatbed, now this was a flatbed rate rally, right? Primarily, it dragged up reefer and spot rates in 2018. It was primarily an industrial-driven economy, lots of flatbed demand. We are currently 56 cents a mile higher than the same week in 2018, for context. And that was sort of the watermark year for flatbed demand. So lots of unusual things. Load post volumes are about triple in the compared to this time last year. So brokers are busily trying to find capacity. And then, of course, we've got right this week, we've got the protests going on north of the border in Canada, your home country. And, of course, that's affecting spot rates northbound more than anything, because a lot of carriers, they'll run south into the US, but they already have a load booked to go back north because you can't do an intra-state move because of cabotage laws. Mm-hmm. So what that'll do, Dan, DJ, it'll throw out the network. So you know how a lot of carriers might leave Quebec on a Friday for Tuesday delivery in Phoenix, have a 34-hour restart, and then load back Wednesday. Those trucks aren't there. So what you're seeing is that network is out of balance, and it doesn't take a lot of trucks to sit home. And what you'll see is that big markets like Phoenix, British Columbia, Philadelphia, Quebec, a lot of lumber comes out of Quebec down to Atlanta, New England. Those trucks aren't on their regular weekly cadence. What it does is it throws spot rates start to take off, and I'm already seeing that happen out of Philly, Phoenix, Atlanta, anything northbound into Canada, we're seeing some pretty, radical volatility in spot rates this morning. So I think that'll just get worse as these protests gather momentum over the course of the week. So lots of things going on. We've got, supply chains still in disarray, lots of geopolitical issues. Gas prices are high. It's forcing up demand for electricity, which is, it's a middle distillate. So that's what's pushing up diesel prices. It's high gas prices because of the competition for what's in the barrel. Yet everyone sort of wants to blame the government for that, which is they're doing that in a pretty big way down here. But it's kind of supply and demand all around. So I think the big story though that I think in Canada that's going to affect a lot of cross-border shippers, Dan, is in your part of the world, is this imbalance of carriers. And I talked to a guy this morning that runs cross-border, a steel hauler, and he said there's not one reputable carrier in the protest. And he showed me the video. And he said a lot of small owner-operators. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because if I was a large fleet or a broker, I'd be going out talking to every shipper that's had their freight stranded. Right now.
Yeah.
That's the
protest, you mean, is not any of the reputable, the highlights, the challengers, this kind of thing.
That's what he said. If you talk to Dan Einweck, he was interviewed this week, and he said it's just one of many things we've got going on. It's just another sort of wrinkle that we've got to deal with. But it was met with a shrug from most of the large fleets, because they have enough drivers that are vaccinated across the border. Worst case scenario, you just do a drop and hook and have a vaccinated driver shuttle freight back and forth across the border in Buffalo, Erie, Sarnia, wherever. Sarnia, sorry. So I think that's what'll happen. I just think this could be much ado about nothing. I think there's a lot of other issues rolled up into this, though, and the vaccine mandate's been a catalyst. And I think, having been up to the Maritimes recently, you guys have had a far more restrictive go at the pandemic than us south of the border. And I can see why people are fed up and angry and frustrated. And this seems to be that outlet. That's why it's gathering so much momentum.
Yeah. I could tell you I'm triple vaccinated.
Right. Same.
I know everybody has their beliefs about it, and they're all entitled to it. My son actually said something to my wife and I the other day that kind of went, and 22 years old, but smart as a whip. And he said, here's the thing is, before we went into this new lockdown that we're in now.
Right.
And I think it's lifted on like the 31st or whatever. And I'm talking specific to Ontario. So anyone that's outside of Ontario, I kind of follow Ontario just because I can't go to the movies and I'm pissed off about it. But, movies, gyms, restaurants, you had to show proof of vaccination to get in. So by locking it down, you're saying the vaccination's not working. And by locking these things down and not allowing gyms to bring people in, not allowing restaurants to have people in. Now, we're in the middle, we were minus 21 2 days ago. And really, you expect people to have people eating on a deck, on a patio? And I get it. They enclose them and they use all these heaters. But if you think about it, they've reduced capacity in the restaurant by 2/3, right? Because most of them are building decks out in the parking lot. Right. So you reduce capacity by 2/3. How much money do you spend on heating that thing? We went to one restaurant last year at this time when everything was locked down and you had to eat outside. And they had this machine that was the size of like a 10-foot trailer pumping heat into this area. Don't get me wrong. It was pretty cool because you're sitting literally out. There's like a snowbank beside you and you're in a t-shirt because you're warm. But how much does it cost to pump that heat into there? Then you're still paying employees. You're still paying tax. You're still paying source deductions. You're still paying all this stuff. And you have a third of the people. So you're still paying your rent. You're still paying your hydro because they have to go in. They have to heat the place. They have to cook. And you think of all of these additional things. And it's to me, it's frustrating because it's like I went and got vaccinated because I believed, I believe wholeheartedly you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. There's two ways to go. And what's the solution? I want life to get back to whatever the hell we can get it back to that, quote unquote normal, whatever anybody wants to say. But for me, I don't get it. And then you take, like, I honestly thought as soon as they put that vaccine mandate, the trans-border shipping, the rates were going to skyrocket. I never, it's funny, Dean, because I never once.
Right.
And when you think about it, it makes sense. The large, really reputable fleets, they were the ones that were on ELDs a year, almost 2 years before the ELD mandate.
Oh,
right.
And way back even in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
They started in 2008 when I was working.
There you go.
Qualcomm.
2008, 2009, 2010. And, but, you know, and then ELD kicked in and there was this huge crisis in the supply chain. But the majority of trucks were actually already ELD compliant.
You know why?
And it's because if you have, you know, you take Challenger, for example, you have that many, what is Challenger, up to 2,800 trucks or something? Like they're pretty big. More than that, I think, actually. So you think about that, you're not going to wait till the last minute to put you're going to be way ahead of it. I remember speaking to Kirk from Highlight, and I was saying, you know, ELD, and he goes, brother, I was on ELD like 3 years ago, you know, and he goes like what? He goes, we put all of our trucks because we need, you know, obviously in that size of fleet and that integrity when it comes to your image, your credibility, your brand, your reputation. It's like, you don't want to be down. I mean, I did a lot of business with Magna companies, and one company in particular was in charge of all the stamps. So they actually would stamp the door panels, right? And so these go on flatbeds, and there's two sides to a stamp, and you were able to get one side on the flatbed. It weighed so much, right? And so what they did is when ELD hit, they had a team driver show up and to load this stamp to go down to Memphis. And they both log in at the same time. So they're driving down the road, and all of a sudden they're both out of hours. And because they weren't trained properly. And I can remember my guy Pete was like losing his marbles. He's like, so we came in, my buddy Steve and I came in, and we started talking to him. And he's like, listen, whatever you do, like, your driver's got to know what the hell they're doing. Because and he told the story. These two guys came in, he goes, not knowing what they were doing. They just kind of left. He goes, I got a call from their dispatch the next day saying, okay, we had to shut down. We're not going to make delivery. He goes, what? It was Teams. He goes, no, they both logged in at the same time. Ha ha, ELD. And he goes, you said ha ha. Now I've got an entire stamping plant down in Memphis. Completely down. He goes, your ha ha just cost me a hell of a lot of cash, you know? And it was like, and this was the problem, but it makes sense when you say that most of these fleets will have enough drivers, even if they have to retool or slip seat or something, you know, slip seat a highway driver into a city truck or whatever and do local P&D if you're not vaccinated. I think you're right. They would have enough room to play in there, right? Because I expected our conversation today to be like, you know, north-southbound rates, because in all the freight I'm moving, even just yesterday, one of the companies I work with, an email went out to my customer, and like, rates are crazy high. And you know, we were talking about Jim Rickards before we got on air. And I'm going to try and get him on the show. But you know, one thing that he said was more companies lost money in 2021 than has ever been recorded. And I don't know the stats to it, but I'm just kind of regurgitating.
Companies in general.
I believe
companies in general lost more money. But more companies. So when beginning of November till the end of December, I spoke to 100 CEOs just to kind of, you know, get a take on the market. And like, I should have kept the stat, but somewhere around like 70% said I knew supply chain was like could cost. I never realized it could cost this much. You know, we had one customer on this show, and he was saying, like, I'm, you know, 5 times my budget. I told you guys about it, where he has 1.6 million square feet of warehouse space he didn't have in 2020. And you think about it, you know, you're upwards of $2.3, $2.4 million a month just on new square footage that your sales don't allot for. It's a lot of money that you're spending at the end of the year, which takes away, you know, big time.
We had,
so 1,500 power units and 3,300 trailers, Jeff says, for Challenger. Thanks, brother. I appreciate you doing that research for us.
Dan's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. You know, he started with a handful of trucks many, many years ago. But when I was running the Australian Trucking Association, Dan was our guest speaker at our ATA conference in Australia. And I think it was 1998. And He's just the nicest guy, and he's such a character. I love spending time with Dan. I hope
he is a character. I played at a couple of golf tournaments with him.
Yeah, you know, he took us on an Oktoberfest tour in the Challenger bus. They have a big motor coach.
Yes.
We went round. It was in that Guelph, Ontario area where they're from. That's one of the really big Oktoberfest celebration areas with all the tents they have. But they wouldn't have done it in the pandemic. But I'll never forget the bus trip from tent to tent to tent. It seemed to last forever. And
I can believe it.
We were drinking water and sodas. Like it was just, but great people. And I think the Canadian carriers are you know, a really good group of carriers. The thing that's kind of surprised me a lot about the protests, I said on an interview yesterday, I said, now I was involved in the Razorback protests in Australia in the 80s, late 70s, 80s. Didn't achieve much. It was great for a little while. We had public support until the gas stations and the shelves got empty in the supermarket. And then they turned on us. So I think that's what everyone's got to be careful of this, because it's a fragmented group of people. They've never had good industry advocacy. So my question is, you know, lobbying for regulatory change means concessions. So what concessions are you offering? Who's the peak body? Who's going to ask the question? And what is it you want? Like, what's the strategy? What's the long-term plan? And I haven't seen that yet. And that's what these carriers have got to be careful. I understand the reasons for the protest, but they've also got to be careful of the downside. And the community can turn very quickly against you when it comes to situations like this. So this is going to be a very volatile week for Canadian carriers and shippers in particular. Very creative industry, though. Like, we are great at getting stuff moved. We will find a way to move freight for sure. Yes. Freight won't be sitting too long anywhere. But I think carriers are going to pay more, because if you think about it, if I've suddenly got a pool of drivers that are vaccinated who've never been across the border, and I've got to find drivers to run cross-border, I'm probably going to have to pay them more, just like you've got to pay people more to drive into the Northeast because all of us Boston drivers are so good, right?
I'm glad you put it that way. Well, or you look at it and you say, you know, there's specific drivers that drive through the mountains.
Yeah.
You know, we got a guy that we talk to quite often, Andrew, and he's been mountain riding, OD, loads, you know, dry van, everything. Been driving for years. And you know, he's said to me many times, he goes, Dan, it would actually shock you.
Right.
At the pass, just before you go into the mountains, there's usually troopers there, and they make you chain up. Right. And he goes, you would be surprised how many drivers spend 2 hours chaining their tires. And he goes, and it doesn't pass, and they got to undo them and redo them. He goes, and then he goes, like, he goes, you need to understand what you do and how you do it, and where you drive, and the needed for security and everything. He goes, like, he goes, I pull up, and he goes, and listen, I've been driving a long time. He goes, I pull up, I'm in and out in no time. Yeah. And these guys are sitting there and they're freezing. He goes, like, they're shaking because it's freezing cold, and they're trying to chain up their tires. And he's like, and they just don't know. He's like,
it's hard.
He's like, it's scary.
Hey, do you watch Highway Through Hell?
Actually, I don't watch it, but I've seen quite a few.
Highway to Hell? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Highway Through Hell. It's out in British Columbia on I think it's the 5, I think, through Merritt and up through the Coquihalla. I love that show because, Dan, to your point, you see all the guys coming through there without chains. And even some guys that put chains on in their poor quality, they'll sit there scratching, trying to get up they call it the smasher. And the weird side of my brain says, I want to go out there and get stuck just so I can have Al Quiring or Gordo yell at me with their big green wrecker and drag me up the top. Because those guys are
It's a total driver mentality.
Yeah, no, I thought I was watching the show Sunday night, and I thought I would love just to get up there and get stuck and have some of these legendary wrecker drivers drag me up the smasher. Now, I would probably lose my license for doing that, but how difficult it is on those roads in British Columbia is just unbelievable. Those guys are just thorough pros, but a lot of guys are inexperienced and they get caught really quickly with some pretty big loads on and get into trouble.
Oh, yeah. Huge. Ryan says, Dean, you're talking my tips, Dean. I booked 6 meetings yesterday asking prospects if their shipments have been stranded. Ryan's all over it.
Look at that.
Pandemic fatigue is real. It is.
Yeah.
It really
I've had
is.
enough of it. Yeah.
Jeff says
Yes.
true. I probably about something we were talking about. Jeff says the protest. Jeff's like the Google master this morning, man. Jeff, protest equates to 13% of drivers. 87% of drivers are fully vaccinated. So what does the 13% represent industry-wide cost-wise to shippers? That's actually a great question. The 13% industry-wide. What does that represent to shippers? And that would be an interesting number to find out.
Remember that a lot of those big fleets have already if they're doing anything with government contracts, right? They've had to have drivers that are vaccinated, right? This is going to be an interesting. I don't know that it's going to have a impact on national rates like that. The rising tide lifts all boats analogy. Like the polar vortex did last year. But I think regionally, you're going to see some pretty, some rate volatility that's going to surprise a lot of people on those lanes that run cross-border where that 13% works, and it might be the really small fleets that predominantly play in the spot market because a lot of your freight running cross-border is contract freight, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So you're not going to turn down loads if you're a carrier unless you've got no equipment there.
Now, do you see... like what happened with Schneider last week, pulling out of Canada. Now their rail division being sold to BNSF or whatever it was. Do you see a lot of other U.S. carriers following suit?
Yeah, there could be a rationalization, I think, across the industry because of the barriers that have been thrown up in terms of the cross-border trade. That's the distinct possibility. I think it's been more coincidental than anything. Okay. I think that's what Schneider said in their press release, that it didn't have anything to do with the vaccine mandate. It may just have been coincidence, but I'm sure there's something behind it in terms of the inefficiencies of running cross-border and all of the different things you've got to do with different drivers and licenses, and you've got different ELD rules, on top of that.
Yeah, and but you would think you'd go to more of a drop and hook scenario. Like if it was profitable and if it made sense for the business, if it made sense for the customer supply chain to maintain that integrity, you'd think it'd be kind of, like in essence, how we started in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
When,
2
decades ago, there was no, maybe 2.5 decades ago, there was no real companies that had, that kept their freight in the same trailer. Like it would go to Laredo or whatever, it would transload or it would drop and hook or, that kind of scenario. And now, companies, you bring it back to Challenger, companies, are also now, they're bringing their own trailers in and their own trailers out, right?
Well, I think a lot of people, I think part of this is going to be a rationalization because it's been such a great year profit-wise. I'd be looking to offload anything that was marginal. Right, because you've got to make sure where am I going to put my assets and trailers and trucks, and if it's in a marginal area where I don't have good margins and there's lots of resistance, I'm going to. And Schneider, Schneider already went out last year, and I think they told people that they had, they were applying a surcharge for shippers that kept, detention surcharge on trailers that were kept too long unloading. Werner did the same. So I think a lot of the public companies have said, a lot of our trailing pool assets are being tied up, not being unloaded quick enough. So I think if I had 50,000 trailers and I had 10 of them sitting around on loading docks in inefficient markets or with shippers that weren't good customers, I know what I'd be doing. I'd just back 100%. Up to the dock really fast and let it unload it all.
You know what? You sanitize the pipeline.
Right.
That's
you sanitize it.
That's
and
right.
I
now what about dog food? What's going on with dog food? I seen that story.
Yeah. There was a packaging problem, right? So it's the same as a lot of different product lines. They've had to change their packaging. Cardboard boxes are issues, right? We had a shortage of cardboard boxes for produce early last year. I think they're all suffering from the same thing right now, and that is absenteeism as a result of the requirements around the pandemic, right? So even though people are still getting sick and you've got high case rates, the protocols mean that you have to be off work and isolate. So that's affecting the stores. It's affecting everyone through the entire supply chain right now. And that's where we started on the show last week with that story from Los Angeles where 8% of their workers are out due to COVID positive cases. So I think that's what's affecting us right now in January. And that could really put a dampener on demand pretty quickly. Doesn't mean, the freight will have to get delivered eventually. It's just been backlogged, I think, right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's Ryan says it right here. He says his dog food packaging is completely different. Even our pet store said there will be an increase. It's funny because I just experienced that yesterday morning. We just got a puppy,
Right.
And we wanted to put the puppy on the puppy version of what Stanley eats, our other dog.
Yeah.
And I walked in and I'm standing in the aisle. And for the first time, I'm like lost. I'm like, I don't see the dog food bag. And I'm looking and I asked the woman, I go, where is it? And she goes, oh, it's right, like literally right in front of me. I go, no, that's not it. She goes, no, it is. I go, no, it's not. I go, it's this color. And it's this like, and it's got a picture of a mountain on it. And she's like, oh no, this is it. It's new.
Yeah.
And I said, no, it's not new. It's an old, and I'm not
Ain't that funny?
I'm not connecting.
Pet food, you go by the bag because there's
I go by the color.
Exactly. It's all the bag or the color.
It's a salmon and rice recipe because we thought Stanley was allergic to chicken. And so I walk down the aisle and the color is what I'm looking for. So I'm literally standing in front of this limited ingredient one. And the woman's like, no, this is it. She goes, it's a new packaging. I go, but it took her
Can't do that.
5 different ways of saying it before my brain went, that makes sense. You know what I mean? And it was like,
I've got a dog food story that really sums up the supply chain. I think we might have covered it 6 months ago, but it's a long story, but I'll make it very, very quick in less than a minute.
I actually love this story. Please go for it. Dean.
My big reefer truck went past my house here in Manchester by the sea, and I thought, you're in trouble, dude, because I know these streets were built for horse and cart 400 years ago, and I know where you're going. So I raced out to help him. He had 12 pallets of dog food delivering to a house down my street in a reefer van from Pennsylvania, and I had to 12 pallets hand unload, right, with a hand truck to the back of the trailer, and the owner of the house was coming out and loading all the dog food into their garage.
Holy
and
cow.
I said, what the heck's going on here? Well, they own a store. Of course, they didn't ship in a full load because they couldn't get enough stock to send a full load. The bigger problem, though, was that there wasn't enough trucks to do the smaller delivery in this little narrow street up in Gloucester. So they had to get the big truck to bring in a part load, hand unload, because they had no forklift, to put in their 4-wheel drive and take up load after load after load into their store. So why wouldn't they normally just get, a pallet like they do every week and a box truck deliver it? Well, they had to order whatever they could get. There was such a shortage. They were worried that if I didn't get over order, I might not have any. And I think that's what's been driving a lot of purchasing in the last year is this over ordering.
Oh yeah. That's It was the shortage and falling behind on sales that they just all of a sudden everybody's like, let me get it. I need it all. And
well, that's why warehousing space got eaten up at a record rate.
Right.
That's why you could literally buy a building, put warehouse in a cardboard box, write it on a cardboard box and stick it outside the building. And I guarantee you within 48 hours, you'll be full. Like literally, it was that bad. I mean, I have a friend of mine up here that runs York warehousing. He's got like more square feet than I can even think of across Canada. I said, hey, do you got 5,000-6,000? He goes, not even close. I'm actually out in trailers, millions of square feet out in trailers.
Yep.
And I said, and it's funny, Dean, because you look at this sanitization. I've had more customers call me in the last 4 to 6 months than ever saying, hey, I got a warehouse deal. And I'm like, okay, what is it? Well, it's 2,000 square feet. I'm like, why are you leaving your present? Well, like my first asked question always when it comes to warehousing is why are you leaving? Because if it's a complete nightmare and you want it at dollar store prices, like that's why nobody wants to deal with you. And it wasn't that. It was we're too small. Like those 2,000, 2,500, even 5,000 square foot deals are too small for companies now. And companies are saying like, listen, you either buy 10,000 square feet or you got to go. And it was, I was like, and at first I'm shocked because I'm saying, well, how long have you been there? Well, I've been there 7 years. And I go, 7 years and they're kicking you out. And I always revert back to 2018, 19. Like that to me is the pinnacle of, you think it's going to be like this for so long and the bottom just falls out, right? If you look, like when you look back to 2018, now obviously pandemic, ELD, 2 completely different scenarios. But I remember speaking to a ton of different suppliers in 2000, asset-based carriers. They're like, finally, the next 5 years are us. Because it's like that 3 to 5 year swing in our industry, right? And they're like, finally, the next 5 years, we get rates that we deserve. And within 12 months, rates from Montreal that are $950, even $1,050 are $350. Toronto, Montreal. You're 346 miles and it's like $350. And I remember because I had a good friend of mine runs a trucking company in Quebec, and he's like, he calls me one day. He goes, "You will not believe what we just got offered." I go, "What?" He goes, $345 to run Montreal, Toronto. I go, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know what the problem is, Dan? People are going to take it."
Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're only as strong as the weakest link. Yeah.
Yeah.
100 times, 100%. So it's interesting because you look at this swing and you look at, you talk about that, people buying things up. This is why Greg at Flair has an extra 1.6 million square feet of warehouse space.
Right.
It's like, people were sick of missing entire launches, like when the pandemic first hit, missing entire launches, having stuff stuck out on container ships that is no longer relevant for the actual market. Just imagine if you had shovels on the container ships and now all the storms hit, like you got a 50% markdown on your shovels and you already paid 4 times as much to get them here. Like that math is never going to work.
Isn't there Christmas trees? I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a container Christmas tree
I'll bet you there's Christmas trees still out there somewhere.
Like, and it's like, now what are you going to do? Now you got to store it for a year,
right?
Before you can sell it for full price, or you mark it down 50% and liquidate it. But
the holding costs, capital tied up, it's a huge deal.
Huge, right? I know. You said you had some numbers to get us out for the end of the day here.
Yeah. So there's 1.2 million containers, 20-foot equivalent units tied up on the just under 100 vessels that are sitting off the port of Los Angeles and out across the Pacific, slow steaming towards the port. 1.2 million TEU. So it's a lot of containers. But the number of the day for Data Wednesday is 57. That's the number of days the Wenhai 313 has been waiting to unload. 57 days. The average is 18.
57.
Right? 57 days.
If the average is 18, how has this ship been sitting there for 57 days?
Yeah.
So here's what's happening. A lot more people, 3PLs, brokers, truck companies have leased their own container ships to run freight. So a lot of smaller vessels, right, have been running. So you've got a lot more smaller vessels heading across the Pacific. So it's increased the volume. And of course, I think the bigger vessels, the mega ones, are getting priority somehow. It feels like they never seem to wait too long. But when I look at the ones in that 50, 60 day, the last one was the Pinocchio last week, which was 60 days. The Wenhai 313, they're only a small in the low sort of 4,000 to 5,000 TEU range. They're not massive vessels. So I think there's something going on there. There's an increased volume of smaller vessels. They're spending a lot longer waiting. So I think you've got this bell curve distribution. I think some of the bigger ships are having priority because some of them are carrying essential cargo. So they're getting priority. I think that's what's going on in some of those ports. So, but 57 days is a long time to sit just doing laps around, an anchor. It's
huge. Now, we see so many people talking about LA. What about the other ports? Because the other ports are backlogged as well. So you got 1.2 million TEU at LA. What about other ports? Do you have a stat or data on like North America? How many containers are sitting offshore?
I don't because East Coast is easy. The vessels come into Seattle or Oakland or Los Angeles, and you can pretty quickly figure out how many are going to come off. Whereas on the other side of the country, on the East Coast, they're doing multiple port calls. So it's hard to say, right? Because you got to come Suez Canal, New York, Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville, New Orleans. You might get out of South America, then back to the Mediterranean. Very hard to get a fix on how many, even though there's vessels sitting at anchor this morning off Charleston, which again is one of those markets that we talked about a while ago as a market to watch. Newport, dredging the harbour, New Berth, lots more vessels calls. But Dan, to your point, this is like that 1980s waterbed you might have had. I know I had one, right? So when you jump on it, it just pops up in another place. So 100%. the congestion has just moved around, and you've got congestion popping up in ports where shippers have sought different routings around. Savannah had congestion. New York has a bit of congestion. Charleston's got a lot of congestion this week, and it'll take time for that to move because of the surging volume that's kind of moving away from the West Coast.
Got it. All right, DJ, pull us out of here, brother.
All right. Well, Dean, thank you again. The information, I know Ryan is probably using everything we just laid down for his customers, his 6 appointments. So good luck with that, Ryan. If you guys do see us after, like and subscribe down below. Again, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30. Wednesdays, Data Day with Dean, Triple D. And we're going to take you out with a great quote by Napoleon Hill, and hopefully this from this doom and gloom of numbers, we can get you all to refuse to quit. So effort only fully releases its reward after a person refuses to quit. Don't quit, guys. Keep pushing.
Right.
We got this.
Keep hammering.
Love that.
Good job. Well done.